The wise don't run from pain. They let it teach them what's truly worth holding on to. But when Logan Brooks saw the woman who had once been his whole world, standing quietly on a crowded street, arms trembling as she held her pregnant belly, he knew it was time to stop running. What would you do if you saw the person you once loved now, vulnerable and alone, needing your help? The city thrummed with the pulse of late-day traffic, its streets lit up in streams of red and yellow as vehicles inched forward. Logan Brooks sat in his matte gray luxury coupe, fingers rhythmically tapping the steering wheel, his phone buzzing non-stop on the console, notifications from investors, his executive assistant, and calendar alerts reminding him of meetings he'd never catch up on. He glanced at his watch. Another call, another presentation, another race against the clock. That was his world now, always accelerating, never pausing. He pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to block out the blare of car horns and impatient commuters. Just as he reached for his phone, something caught his eye across the boulevard. A woman was struggling with her shopping bags. One slipped from her hand, sending fruit and canned goods tumbling onto the sidewalk. She knelt to gather them, her movements sluggish, almost strained. Then she wobbled slightly, one hand cradling her belly. Logan froze. His pulse jumped. The woman's face, though tired and pale, was instantly recognizable. Rachel. It was like the city sounds dropped away, replaced by a low hum. Months had passed since he'd last seen her. She looked changed, her once bright spark dulled, her frame softened by pregnancy, but there was no doubt. It was Rachel Hayes, the woman to whom he had once vowed the world. Now she stood alone on a busy street, struggling to pick up fallen groceries. Logan Brooks had crafted a life others envied. He was a self-made millionaire, with a tech empire that touched nearly every industry. People admired his resilience, his clarity, his relentlessness. He was the closer, the man who outworked, outthought, outlasted. But beneath the tailored suits and 10-figure success, there was a silence that followed him like a shadow. He was a master at the pitch. No one could deny his talent for reading people, saying just what they needed to hear to seal the deal. Yet no one saw what came afterward. The quiet drives home to a mansion that felt more like a display room than a place to live. Dinners eaten alone at a dining table meant for 10. At night, when the city dimmed and the notifications finally stopped, he'd wander the house in silence, his footsteps echoing against marble floors and high ceilings. Every surface gleamed with wealth, fine art, designer furniture, smart home tech, but it all felt hollow. He had built his legacy, yes, but somewhere along the climb, something had slipped through his fingers. Or maybe, deep down, he simply refused to name what it was. Whenever the stillness lingered too long, his mind would drift to a time when things weren't so cold, when the house wasn't silent, when he wasn't alone. He'd see her face, clear and vivid, like a photograph burned into his memory, Rachel. She had been there at the very beginning, when Logan's ambitions were nothing but notes scribbled on napkins. They had lived in a tiny walk-up apartment in downtown Seattle, the walls smelling faintly of old paint and Vietnamese takeout from the shop below. The furniture didn't match, the radiator rattled instead of heating, and sometimes the fridge was so empty it ached to open it. But they had each other, and back then, that had been enough. "Logan," she'd say, her voice calm but firm, whenever he came home after another failed pitch, another closed door, "You're going to make it. I know you will. You just have to keep pushing." Her faith in him never wavered, even when his own did. She'd sit up with him through those long nights, reviewing pitch decks, tweaking strategy, calculating runway projections. She laughed at his terrible jokes. She cheered even their smallest wins like they'd landed $1 million round. There was one night he couldn't forget, no matter how many years passed. He came home late, after a pitch that had gone worse than expected. His shoulders slumped, his expression hollow. "It's over, Ratch," he muttered, collapsing onto the couch, his face buried in his hands. "They turned us down again. I don't know how much more I can take." She sat next to him, gently pulling his hands away, holding them. "It's not over, Logan," she said, firm. "You've had worse days. You'll get up tomorrow and go again, and you'll win because that's who you are." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, the crushing weight on his chest eased. She was his constant, his compass, the only thing that made sense when everything else felt like chaos. But even then, buried beneath his gratitude was a fear he never dared voice, a fear of becoming like his father, a man who built an empire and lost a family. Logan had watched that unraveling in real time. The boardrooms that replaced bedtime stories, the money that couldn't buy presents. He had promised himself he would be different. And yet, the moment success knocked, he'd chosen the grind over the girl, thinking he'd have time to fix it later. Only now, later had shown up, with Rachel alone and pregnant on a street corner, a mirror to everything he had tried not to become. But things changed. As Logan's career surged forward, so did the demands on his time. At first, it was a few late nights, then many. He'd come home after Rachel had already gone to bed. He'd whisper apologies, kiss her on the forehead, and promise to make it up to her. And she always believed him. Because when you love someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt. But the late nights kept coming. The soft apologies became quick excuses. And the promises, those well-meaning promises, never quite materialized. The whispered apologies had become rushed excuses. And the promises, those well-meaning, hopeful promises, never seemed to come true. Logan was always busy, always chasing the next deal, the next big break. And Rachel, for all her patience and grace, began to feel like she was fading from his view. She never voiced it, but the loneliness started creeping in. It showed up in the quiet moments, like evenings when she'd set the table for two, only to eat alone because Logan had called saying he'd be late. Mornings when she'd wake up and the other side of the bed was cold. Logan already gone for a meeting or catching a flight. And weekends, once their sacred time, were slowly consumed by fundraisers, client brunches, and back-to-back calls. Rachel tried to adapt. She convinced herself it was temporary, just the price of building something together. But there were nights she'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking herself when temporary would end. And then there were other nights. Nights when the weight in her chest grew so heavy it felt hard to breathe. She didn't have a name for it then, but it was always there, sitting just beneath the surface. She didn't want to resent Logan. She knew how hard he was working, how much he wanted to achieve, not just for himself, but for them both. She wanted to support him. That's what she'd always done. So she smiled through it, burying her own worries to make room for his ambition. But every now and then, she'd catch her reflection and pause. The woman looking back at her seemed worn down, unfamiliar. It didn't help that Logan's world was growing further from hers. As his business exploded, so did his social circle. Colleagues, investors, people who made conversation look effortless at rooftop parties and private dinners. Rachel stood beside him, smiling politely, engaging in small talk, but she never felt like she belonged. Those were Logan's people, not hers. She could feel it in their tone, the way they asked questions that skimmed the surface, as if she were an accessory, not a partner. One night, after yet another gala where she'd spent more time chatting with the waitstaff than actual guests, she finally said something. "Logan," she began as they walked through the door, "do you ever feel like we're living in two different worlds?" He glanced at her, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" he asked while loosening his tie, heading to the kitchen. She followed, her voice more hesitant now. "I mean, when we're at those events, your work events, I feel like I'm just there, like I'm a guest in your life." Logan opened the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water, frowning. "That's not true," he said, brushing it off. "You're not a guest, Rach, you're my partner." "Am I?" she asked quietly. The question lingered in the space between them. He turned, confused. "Of course you are. I wouldn't be here without you." She wanted to believe it, but the words felt rehearsed, like something he thought he should say, not something he truly felt. She wanted to respond, to explain how distant she'd been feeling, but she didn't have the strength. So she nodded silently and went to bed, leaving him to his emails and spreadsheets. But nothing changed. In fact, things only got worse. Rachel stopped going to the events. She stopped staying up for him. She tried to fill the silence with hobbies, with visits to friends, anything to dull the ache of their growing distance. But the ache didn't leave. It just settled in deeper, carving out a space inside her she could no longer ignore. The breaking point came on a quiet Saturday morning. Logan was in his home office, buried in documents. Rachel sat on the couch, her eyes fixed on the packed suitcase by the door. She'd been staring at it for what felt like hours, her chest tight as she practiced the words she'd been afraid to say. The suitcase wasn't just luggage. It was everything she hadn't said, every moment she'd swallowed instead of speaking up. It was the pain of setting dinner for two and eating alone, of cold sheets and colder silences. It was her last thread of hope and her final act of strength. As her hand brushed the handle, her heart broke all over again, not for leaving, but for how long she'd stayed. When she finally stood and walked to his office, her legs barely carried her. She tapped gently on the door frame. Logan looked up, distracted. "Hey," he said, motioning her in. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something." "No," she said, voice trembling. "It can't." He paused, setting down his pen. For the first time in weeks, he really looked at her. "What's going on?" Rachel took a deep breath. Her fists clenched at her sides. "I can't do this anymore, Logan." His eyes widened like she'd slapped him. "What do you mean? Can't do what?" "This," she said, waving her hand toward the office, toward him, toward everything. "I can't keep living like this. I feel like I'm disappearing, like I'm just waiting around, hoping you'll see me, and I can't do it anymore." "Rachel," he started, but she cut him off with a shake of her head. "I love you," she said, voice cracking. "I always have, but I can't keep giving up who I am for a life that doesn't even feel like mine anymore. You're building this incredible future, Logan, but I don't see myself in it." He rose, reaching for her. She stepped back. "Don't," he said, his voice desperate. "We can fix this. I'll do better. It's too late," she whispered, tears trailing down her cheeks. "I've been trying, Logan. I've been trying for so long, and I can't anymore." She turned and walked out before he could say another word. Her suitcase in hand. The sound of the front door shutting behind her echoed through the house, and for the first time, Logan realized just how silent everything was. Silent and empty in a way he hadn't truly understood until now. She was gone. He didn't even realize he'd been holding his breath until a horn blared behind him, snapping him back to the present. Logan blinked, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. For a split second he hesitated. Should he get out? Should he call her name, say anything? But then he saw Rachel stumble. At first it was just a slight falter, her hand reaching out to steady herself against nothing but the cold air. Then, as if in slow motion, she crumpled to the ground. Her knees hit the pavement. The groceries she just managed to collect spilled again, scattering across the noisy sidewalk. Logan threw open his door and stepped out onto the concrete. He didn't know what he was going to say, only that he couldn't just sit there. Not this time. The air felt heavier somehow, every sound dulled as he took one cautious step forward, then another. "Rachel," he called, his voice barely audible, like saying her name louder might shatter the fragile reality in front of him. She turned her head slightly, her gaze rising to meet his. In that fleeting second, her tired, worn eyes locked onto his, and the years between them seemed to vanish. But then her expression changed. Confusion, recognition, and then something else he couldn't place. Fear? Shame? He didn't have time to figure it out. Her body swayed again, and before he could process what was happening, his legs were already moving. "Rachel." This time his voice cracked, louder, panicked. He reached her just as she collapsed forward, catching her in his arms. Her body trembled slightly in his hold, lighter than he remembered, her breathing faint and shallow. His heart hammered as he eased her gently down to the ground, one hand brushing her hair out of her face. "Rachel, can you hear me? It's me, Logan. I'm here." Her lips parted. A faint sound escaped, incoherent. Her eyes fluttered, then slowly closed, her body going slack in his arms. "No, no, no," he muttered, shaking slightly as he gave her shoulder a gentle nudge. "Stay with me, Rachel, please." She stirred faintly, her head rolling against his chest. "Logan?" she whispered, so softly he almost missed it. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," he snapped, though it came out more broken than angry. "You just collapsed on the street, Rachel. What's going on? What's happening to you?" Her hand shifted slightly, moving to her stomach. That's when he noticed, really noticed, the way her other arm protectively cradled the curve beneath her coat. His breath caught. His chest tightened as the realization sank in. She was pregnant. Rachel was pregnant. "Is it the baby?" he asked, leaning closer, his voice urgent. "Is something wrong? Please, Rachel, talk to me." "No," she murmured, almost inaudible. "Just tired." "Tired?" He echoed in disbelief. Rachel, you collapsed. That's not just tired. He stopped himself, exhaling harshly. This wasn't the time to argue, not when she looked like she might lose consciousness any second. He had to act. Okay, he said, firm now, partly to her and partly to himself. We're going to the hospital, right now. No, she protested weakly, her fingers gripping the sleeve of his coat with what little strength she had left. I don't need. Rachel, stop, he cut in, his voice gentle but unyielding. You can explain later, but right now this isn't optional. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. Her hand slipped from his sleeve, falling limp at her side. Logan didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, holding her against him. She felt so small, so light, so fragile, and it made something inside him twist in a way he couldn't describe. Hold on, okay? He said, voice softer now. Just hold on. He moved quickly, weaving through the stream of pedestrians who barely gave him a second glance. The honks, the chatter, the noise. It all blurred as he focused on the only thing that mattered now. Getting her somewhere safe. When he reached his car, he opened the passenger side with one hand, easing her into the seat as carefully as he could. He adjusted her position gently, making sure she was as comfortable as possible before closing the door and rushing around to the driver's side. As he slid into his seat and started the engine, he stole a quick glance her way. Her eyes were closed, her hands still resting protectively over her stomach. She looked so fragile, so unlike the Rachel he had once known, the woman who had stood beside him with calm strength and an unshakable belief in them. Now she looked like she was barely holding on. Logan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white as he merged into traffic. The drive to the hospital felt never-ending, every red light dragging on like an eternity. His mind raced, a storm of guilt and panic. What had happened to her? How had things gotten this bad? Why hadn't he known? Why hadn't she told him? He glanced over at her again, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, each breath a reassurance, but also a haunting reminder of how breakable she seemed. Just hang on, he muttered under his breath, unsure if he was speaking to her or to himself. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Logan parked recklessly near the entrance, ignoring the irritated looks as he jumped out of the car. He rushed around to her side, opening the door and leaning in, brushing a hand gently against her cheek. Rachel, we're here, he said quietly. Can you hear me? Without waiting for a response, he lifted her out of the car, holding her close as he carried her into the hospital. The cold air inside hit him like a wave, but he barely noticed. Nurses turned as he entered, their expressions shifting from surprise to immediate concern as they took in the sight of the unconscious woman in his arms. She collapsed, Logan said, his voice urgent. She's pregnant, please help her. They rushed toward him, guiding him to a wheelchair. Set her down here, one of them instructed. We'll take care of her now. Logan hesitated for a second, reluctant to let go, but then he nodded and carefully placed Rachel into the wheelchair. She stirred faintly, her head tilting to the side as the nurses began wheeling her down the hallway. Should I? He started to ask, but one nurse interrupted. You can wait in the lobby. We'll update you as soon as we know something. Logan paced the waiting room, his footsteps quiet against the linoleum floor. His thoughts were scattered, looping through fragments of conversation, memories, and regrets. Every so often, he'd glance at the double doors she had vanished behind, silently willing someone to come out and tell him she was okay. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. Then, finally, a doctor stepped into the room, his expression calm but focused. How is she? Logan asked, stepping forward. Is the baby? She's stable, the doctor replied with a nod. The baby is too, but she's severely malnourished and extremely fatigued. We're giving her fluids and monitoring both of them closely. She's going to need rest, nutrition, and time, but for now, she's okay. Logan let out a long breath, relief crashing over him. Thank you. Can I see her? The doctor nodded. She's sleeping now, but yes, just keep things quiet. She needs rest more than anything. Logan followed him down the corridor, his heart beat loud in his ears. When they reached the room, he stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame. Rachel lay in the hospital bed, pale but peaceful, her hands resting over her belly. She looked so small, so vulnerable, and it hit him like a punch in the gut. He stepped inside quietly and pulled a chair beside the bed. For a while, he just sat there, watching her breathe. He wanted to say something, to touch her hand, to make things right. But no words came. Then, faint voices drifted in from the hallway. He wasn't trying to listen, but the words came through clearly. "She doesn't have insurance that covers this," one nurse said softly. "Her bills are months behind. I heard she's been living out of her car," another replied. "Poor thing, and she's pregnant too. It's a miracle she's even here." Logan's stomach twisted. Living out of her car? Months behind on bills? His eyes returned to Rachel, still sleeping, and his chest tightened. She had been right there, hurting, fighting to stay afloat, while he was busy chasing deals, closing contracts, winning in boardrooms, and he hadn't noticed. His world had gotten bigger while hers had shrunk to the inside of a broken-down car. Shame and helplessness knotted in his throat. He'd thought success meant never letting her down again. But this was failure. How had it come to this? How had she ended up here? Alone, struggling, nearly invisible. His jaw clenched as he stood up, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. He moved to the side of the bed, fists clenched at his sides. "Rachel," he said softly, voice low but full of emotion. "How did this happen? Why didn't you reach out? Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes fluttered open slowly, unfocused. Then she turned her head away, staring toward the window. "Because I couldn't," she said quietly. "Not to you." "Not to me?" he echoed, stepping closer. "Rachel, you're pregnant. You've been living out of your car. Why wouldn't you say something?" Her hand instinctively tightened over her stomach, and she let out a small, shaky breath. "Out a shaky breath. Because I didn't think you'd care, Logan." Her voice was calm, but carried something underneath, something he couldn't quite name. "Not after everything." Her words struck harder than he expected. "You know that's not true," he said, voice thick with guilt. "Do I?" she asked, turning her head to face him. Her eyes were tired, her expression unreadable. "You barely noticed me back then, Logan. Why would this be any different?" He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but nothing came out. Because she wasn't wrong. He had failed her before, and that truth weighed on him now more than ever. Rachel sighed, her gaze drifting to the ceiling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said softly. "After I left, I thought I could start over. I really believed I could build something new." "What happened?" he asked gently, leaning in closer. She was silent for a long time. Then slowly she spoke. "I loaned my savings to my cousin Mia. She promised to pay me back, but then she lost her job. And then I got laid off when my company downsized. I couldn't keep up with rent. I tried. I really tried." She trailed off, shaking her head. "It was one thing after another. Eventually I couldn't afford the apartment. I ended up in my car. It broke down a few weeks ago." Logan stared at her, each word tightening the knot in his chest. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked again, this time more softly. "Because I didn't want to," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "Rachel?" She shook her head, cutting him off. "I've been surviving, Logan. Barely, but surviving. And I didn't need you showing up to fix everything. Not after everything that happened." She had every right to feel the way she did. Logan leaned back, dragging a hand down his face, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, he saw the cracks in his so-called perfect life. The ways he had failed, not just her, but himself. He had measured success by boardroom wins and investor calls, never realizing how far that distance had stretched between them. She had lost so much, and he hadn't even noticed. The guilt sat deep in his bones, not just for what she'd endured, but for how invisible she must have felt. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." She didn't respond. Her eyes closed again, her body heavy with exhaustion. Logan stayed there, watching her, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of what he had lost, what he had let slip through his fingers. And for the first time, he knew just how badly he needed to make it right. Over the next few days, Logan came to the hospital regularly to check on Rachel. She was improving, her color coming back, her movements steadier. But between them hung a silence, a heaviness neither of them dared to touch. One afternoon, a nurse entered the room with a warm smile and helped Rachel adjust her gown for the ultrasound. Logan sat in the chair beside her, his hands clasped tightly, trying to stay composed, though his heart was thudding hard in his chest. Rachel lay back on the exam table, her shirt pulled up just enough to reveal her rounded belly. The nurse applied the cold gel to her skin, and soon the room filled with the sound of the baby's heartbeat, steady, rhythmic. Logan froze. That sound, strong, unrelenting, wasn't just medical noise. It was life. His child. His breath hitched, and suddenly, the sterile room felt sacred. In that rhythm was everything he hadn't known he'd been missing, everything he now couldn't imagine living without. Logan's breath caught. The sound echoed inside him. It was real. All of it. And he couldn't take his eyes off the monitor, watching the faint outline of the tiny life growing inside her. It felt surreal, like a dream he hadn't even realized he'd had. The doctor entered, clipboard in hand, a cheerful smile on his face. "There's the little one," he said, glancing at the monitor. "Healthy and right on schedule. Congratulations, Dad." Logan froze. "What?" The word came out harsher than he meant, slicing through the soft hum of the moment. He turned sharply toward Rachel, eyes wide. "What did he just say?" The doctor, unaware of the shift, chuckled. "I said congratulations. You've got a healthy baby in there." Logan turned back to Rachel. She still wasn't looking at him, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, her mouth a firm line. The silence between them screamed louder than any words. "Rachel," he said, "is the baby mine?" Still no response. But her eyes flickered, just slightly. Enough. It was all the answer he needed. The room tilted. Logan's breath caught in his throat, the air suddenly too thin. He gripped the armrests of his chair, trying to process what he'd just heard, what he'd just realized. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice low, strained. "Why didn't you think I had a right to know?" Rachel turned her head slightly, her expression closed off. "Because it wouldn't have mattered." "What?" he said, stunned. "You barely noticed me back then, Logan. Why would this be any different?" He flinched, her words sliced through him like glass. "That's not fair," he muttered, shaking his head. "You know that's not fair." "Isn't it?" She shot back, her voice sharper now. She sat up slightly, wincing as she moved. "You weren't there, Logan. You weren't there when I needed you, when we were supposed to be building a life together. You were always too busy. Too busy for me, too busy for anything that didn't revolve around your work. And now you think you can just step in and fix everything?" Her words hit him like a wave, a flood of emotions rising in his chest. He didn't know what to say, how to convince her that he wasn't that man anymore, or at least that he didn't want to be. "I let you walk away," he said quietly, voice thick, "because I thought it was what you needed. I thought I wasn't enough for you. But now I see I wasn't even there when you needed me most. And I'm sorry for that, Rachel. I really am." She looked at him, her face softening slightly, though her shoulders stayed tense. "It's not that simple, Logan. This isn't about apologies. It's about responsibility, about showing up. And you don't get to swoop in now and expect me to believe you've changed." "I'm not asking you to believe anything," he said quickly. "I'm asking for a chance to prove it, to prove that I want to be here, for you, for the baby. Not because I feel obligated, because I want to." Rachel looked at him for a long time. Her eyes, tired and rimmed with exhaustion, glistened with unshed tears. She seemed to be searching his face for something, some trace of truth. Her voice broke when she finally spoke. "I can't do this alone," she whispered, her shoulders sagging beneath the weight of everything she had carried. It was an admission born of fear, fatigue, and loneliness. "You won't have to," Logan said without hesitation. "I promise, Rachel. Whatever you need, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She gave a slight nod, barely noticeable, but it was enough. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice thin with exhaustion. Logan felt a mixture of relief and determination rush through him. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A beginning, a chance to do things differently, a chance not to lose what mattered this time. The weeks that followed were a blur of change, much of it initiated by Logan. He didn't know exactly how to fix things, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let Rachel carry it all alone anymore. Not when he had the means to help. Not when he wanted to be the man she and their child deserved. His first priority was getting her somewhere safe. He spent days calling agents, demanding they find a quiet, comfortable apartment near the hospital. When he finally brought her to the sunlit unit, her reaction caught him off guard. "It's too much, Logan," she said softly, standing at the threshold of the living room, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. "You don't have to do all this." "Yes, I do," he said, stepping closer. "You need a place that's stable, somewhere comfortable. This isn't me trying to fix everything overnight. It's just me trying to make life a little easier for you, for both of you. She held his gaze a moment longer, uncertain. Then, she nodded. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. But Logan didn't stop there. He quietly paid off her medical bills, made sure she had everything she needed. And while the big gestures mattered, it was the smaller ones that began to change things between them. One night, he tried to cook for her. It was a disaster. He had watched a tutorial online, convinced he could manage something simple, like pasta. But the sauce burned, the noodles stuck together in a clump, and smoke filled the kitchen. Rachel stood in the doorway, an amused smile on her face as he frantically waved a dish towel at the smoke detector. You know, she said, holding back a laugh, there's this amazing thing called takeout. You might want to look into it. Logan turned to her, cheeks flushed. I was trying to do something nice, he muttered, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smile. She stepped forward, shaking her head. Well, I appreciate the effort, she said, gently taking the spoon from his hand. But next time, maybe stick to salad. They both laughed, an easy, unexpected moment that broke through the heaviness that had hung between them for so long. He also started going with her to every doctor's appointment, sitting beside her in the waiting room, asking questions during the checkups. At first, Rachel looked surprised, her brows raising when he asked about due dates and newborn sleep habits. But with time, her surprise softened into something else, something like trust. You don't have to come to all these, you know, she said one afternoon as they left the clinic. She adjusted her coat and glanced sideways at him. Most guys would leave this stuff to the moms. I'm not most guys, he replied simply, holding the door for her. And besides, this isn't just about you, it's about both of us, figuring this out together. She didn't say anything right away, but the faint smile that curved her lips said enough. The silences between them grew lighter. Logan found himself looking forward to their time together, even the ordinary moments. He started spending more time at her apartment, bringing groceries, helping her sort through baby clothes, and simply being there. Slowly, the barriers Rachel had built around herself began to fall. One evening, as they sat on the couch after dinner, takeout this time, Logan glanced at her. A heaviness settled in his chest, something he couldn't quite name. She was folding tiny onesies, her fingers moving gently, carefully, filled with a quiet kind of love for the child she hadn't even met yet. Rachel, he said softly, breaking the silence. She looked up, her hands still. Yeah? He hesitated, tracing patterns on the edge of the coffee table. I need to tell you something. Her brows pulled slightly together and she set the onesie aside. Okay, she said cautiously. What is it? He took a breath, eyes fixed on the floor. I thought that if I became successful, if I built a life that looked perfect, it would make me worthy of you. I thought it would fix everything, but all it did was push you away. Her expression softened. She leaned back slightly, her hands resting on her lap. Logan, she began, her voice trembling. I never needed you to be perfect. I never needed the big job or the nice apartment. I just needed you to try, she said, her voice breaking. That's all I ever wanted. His chest tightened. I'm trying now, he said quietly. I know it's late, maybe too late, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for a long moment, and then slowly she nodded. I know, she said gently. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was something. For the first time in years, Logan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The call came in the middle of the night. Logan had just drifted off when his phone buzzed loudly. He grabbed it, Rachel's name on the screen, making his heart jump. Rachel? He answered, voice sharp with concern. It's time, she said, her voice breathless. I think it's happening. Logan, I'm scared. Don't move, he said, already out of bed and pulling on his shoes. Just breathe. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The drive felt endless. Every stoplight and slow car only tightened the knot in his stomach. By the time he reached her building, his hands were shaking. He found her on the couch, pale and sweating, one hand on her stomach, the other gripping the armrest. I think it's too soon, she said through clenched teeth as he knelt beside her. It's okay, he said, grabbing her hand. We've got this. Let's get to the hospital. He helped her stand, moving as quickly as her pain would allow. She winced with every step, clutching his arm. Once she was in the car, he hovered for a second, hand on her shoulder. "We've got this," he said again, even as his heart pounded. The hospital was a whirlwind of urgent instructions and quick movements. Doctors and nurses guided them through halls and into a delivery room. Logan stayed by Rachel's side, holding her hand through every contraction. Her grip nearly broke his fingers. "You're doing amazing," he whispered, brushing hair from her damp forehead. "Don't say just a little longer unless you're the one doing this," she snapped, panting through another wave of pain. Logan couldn't help a breathless chuckle. "Fair enough, but you're still incredible." Hours passed in a blur, and then, finally, a sharp, beautiful cry filled the room. Logan froze. His breath caught as the nurse placed the tiny baby girl into Rachel's arms. Rachel's expression softened instantly. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she looked at their daughter. "She's perfect," Rachel whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. Logan leaned in, his throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, she really is." In that moment, he realized this was more than fatherhood. It was redemption. A second chance handed to him in the smallest, most fragile form imaginable. All the missed moments, the years apart, they faded behind the sound of her heartbeat and the warmth of her mother's arms. In that moment, everything else faded. The mistakes, the time lost, they didn't matter. All that mattered was this new life and the vow to never let them down. The days that followed were chaotic and exhausting. Logan threw himself into learning, asking endless questions, reading every parenting article, watching every newborn tutorial. His first attempt at swaddling was a disaster. The blanket bunched up, and the baby wiggled free almost instantly. "How do they make this look so easy?" he muttered, frustrated. Rachel, sipping tea nearby, burst out laughing. "You're overthinking it," she said, setting her cup down. "Here, let me show you." She guided his hands, helping him get the wrap just right. When the baby was finally snug, Logan grinned. "Look at that," he said proudly. "We make a good team." "Don't get cocky," she teased, but there was warmth in her smile that hadn't been there in a long time. They found their rhythm, together. There were sleepless nights, shared yawns over cold coffee, and mornings spent watching their daughters sleep. One night, as Logan rocked the baby, Rachel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, a quiet smile on her face. "You're good at this," she said. "I'm trying," he replied softly. "I still feel like I'm guessing half the time." "Welcome to parenthood," Rachel said with a small laugh as she joined him. "But really, Logan, you're doing a good job." His heart swelled. "Thanks. That means a lot." Time passed. The walls between them continued to crumble. They took walks in the park, watched their daughter giggle at dogs and trees, and started talking, not just about diapers and feeding, but about the things they'd once avoided. One night, with the baby asleep, Logan turned to Rachel. "You know," he said, voice quiet, "I never thought I'd get a second chance, with you, with any of this." Rachel looked at him, her face unreadable, then smiled. "You earned it," she said simply. The words rooted in his chest, quiet and steady, not given freely, but not withheld. It wasn't a promise, it was a possibility. And that was everything. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was something real. And as they sat together in the gentle silence of their new life, Logan knew this time he wasn't going to let it go. Dear friend, life rarely gives us second chances, but when it does, they almost never come wrapped in perfection. They come through the ache of regret, through the weight of silence, through the fragile voice that says, "I can't do this alone." Logan's story reminds us of something powerful that the Stoics knew well. That control is an illusion, but choice is not. We don't choose our past, but we choose who we become after it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." For Logan, the obstacle, his failure, became his path to redemption. So if today you're carrying guilt or wishing you could undo something, remember this: the future is still unwritten. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is show up with open hands, honest words, and the willingness to begin again. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to try. If this story moved you, consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing for more heartfelt stories that speak to the soul. Your support helps us keep creating what matters. Thank you.